Good morning, everyone. Really great to have you all here. Thanks for joining us this morning. We are pleased to be talking today about early years co-production. So thanks for joining. We've got people joining from all over the country. Some of the areas we've been working with, Isle of Wight and Sunderland. I've noticed you're both here. Thank you for joining us. And we've got people from Blackburn, people from Kent. We can see in the chat. So thank you, everybody, and we're going to have an action-packed morning. We're going to hear from our colleagues in Genuine Partnerships, and I'm going to take us on to our agenda this morning. Our national seminar today is going to cover the cornerstones of co-production, which is an area of expertise of Genuine Partnerships, who are joining us from Rotherham. And so that's my colleagues Claire, Marie Whiting and Kaylee Harrison. So thank you and welcome. And after that, we're going to have a quick break over lunchtime, and then we're going around 11 o'clock. And then we're going to have Rachel, who is Rachel Wright, who's joining us from Born at the Right Time. And Rachel is the director and founder of Born at the Right Time. And she's a parent carer of a child with complex needs, and she is also a nurse by background. So welcome, Rachel, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and we're going to have some questions and answers later in the session. So in the meantime, I want to just take us on to our next thing we're going to do is to hear from some parents and carers themselves. And Ashley is my colleague at Contact. My name is Mary Mulvey-Oates, and I am Programme Manager for our Early Years SEND programme. And I'm going to pass you now to Ashley to introduce yourself. Ashley, hi.
Hi, so I'm Ashley, and I'm the Early Years SEND Coordinator for the targeted areas. We're going to take you guys through to the video now. Can you go into the video, please, Mary? So this was a project that we ran with some practitioners and parents from Manchester and from Lambeth. It's just a few insights on their challenges and positives from the experience that they've had when interacting with practitioners or parents with children with SEND, especially early years. So if you want to press play, thank you. Okay.
Just the quick referrals and not having to fight for the services was really helpful.
One of the best things was when I was having challenges, the school never understood her. She's amazing. They just need to walk around with her to be able to understand that sometimes they need to have that routine in place for her.
So I think I really appreciated the people who were just kind and tolerant and understanding.
The team on the children's ward were just incredible. The nurses especially, very honest, but always had hope, because at that time there wasn't a lot around.
There was no spaces in the side rooms, so they just shut the whole sensory room off and let us be in the sensory room, because you can't cope with noise and distractions and things. It made it a trillion times easier for us and for her, and she didn't get distressed.
The doctor that diagnosed him did it in the nicest way I can imagine it to be done, and it's completely shaped how we parent Ali.
Maybe they can explain the medical terms better.
Every time I see anybody have to go through what it is and what his problems are, do a little bit of, background research before they speak to you.
It's that person-centred approach to it. She doesn't fit in any boxes. Don't try and fit her in them. Just talk to me and I'll give you all the information you need. And I just found that was very closed off for us.
Probably the most stressful thing of having a disabled child is having to jump through all the hoops. They made us go to this group parenting class to help your child to speak more He's absolutely non-verbal and the condition means he's non-verbal, but that was very clear that right from early on.
So I think I would have appreciated more people sharing their expertise, tell us that, you know, her journey was going to be different.
You'd be at an appointment where sometimes my son had to be there, and then afterwards it was really difficult because you'd come out and you'd think, I can't remember what they said about this. It was quite distracting. Sometimes it might have just been helpful to have gone away and had like a phone call afterwards just with them when I wasn't distracted by also caring for my son.
A tip to practitioners would be to signpost to other people going through similar experiences, to charities, to support groups, so you're not as isolated as you can be.
Tell them how it is being an autistic person, how the children see the world, because we don't know how it is. So yeah, if those things are explained in a better way, then maybe it will help a lot of parents.
So to always start with something positive, start by saying, well, they're a really lovely, happy girl, and we've noticed this, this and this.
I think make sure that your whole team are SEND educated. What about the receptionists? What about the administrative staff? Because sometimes they're the people that you need to deal with.
With English as a second language, I feel like those people aren't being accessed. They're the ones that I see struggle the most in hospital.
So if we accept people for who they are, then we'll have a peaceful life and peaceful world.
Put that human element on it a little bit more. And you know, there's jargon like milestones and things like that, which are important, and that's how they measure progress. But as a parent, that's not how we measure progress.
Thank you, Ashley, and really great to hear directly from families there about what works really well in the early years and perhaps what could be done differently in the early years to support families. So I wanted to say a little bit about the organisation I work for, which is Contact. Contact exists for families of disabled children. So we support families with information and advice. And we deliver, we bring families together to support each other, and we have we have campaigns and that we run on behalf of families and with families to fundraise and with volunteers as well. So Contact has a fantastic helpline, and we have lots of advice and information for families, but also for practitioners. So do please have a look on our website and browse around that, because it's a great resource for everybody. And a lot of families say, wish we'd had this information earlier. So that's why we want to reach families in those early years where possible. So for this piece of work, we're funded to deliver the Early Years SEND programme. We're working alongside 5 other partner organisations who are the Council for Disabled Children. I think Christina's joining us today. Hi, Christina. We've got Dingley's Promise, we've got National Children's Bureau, we've got NASEN, and Speech and Language UK, who we deliver some of our parent workshops with to support families to understand children's speech and language needs. So we're working together across those 6 partner organisations funded by the Department for Education. And one of the things we're doing is we're working to ensure that we've got targeted support into some areas of the country where we're funded to actually deliver workshops and action learning sets with those areas. So for this coming year, we will be recruiting 5 more areas, and our programme runs until March 2025. So if you are a family hub area, whether you're with a parent carer forum or if you're with a local authority SEND team or with a family hub, if your area is a family hub area, we may be able to support you. So please do get in touch, and our email addresses will be available. We'll contact you with all the details. So that's happening this year, and we're also looking forward to working across a wider area. So if I could pass to Ashley in a minute to describe what we're doing there. But just to say that our programme is adapted this year to focus on how family hubs can welcome and support families from underrepresented communities. And we'll talk some more about that with Genuine Partnerships when they give some really great examples of how to work in co-production with families. We've continued to focus on that co-production work, and that's core to what we do as an organisation. And it's a really strong area of expertise of our partner organisation, Genuine Partnerships. So we want to set a culture of equal relationships, working together with families as equal partners. And we're going to talk a bit about some examples in practice as we go through this morning's session. But just to say also, we're going to share with you after this the diversity toolkit that we've developed with the Diversity Trust. And that really looks at not just families of children with special needs and disabilities, but also how those disabilities may intersect with other areas of disadvantage or protected characteristics, for example, minority ethnicity or LGBTQ. So we're looking at where families may have layers of disadvantage or difference that we want to make sure services are properly thinking about, supporting and celebrating. So I'm going to pass you now to Ashley to describe a bit more about our targeted support. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Mary. So the targeted support that we've delivered this year is to the areas of Portsmouth, Newcastle, Sunderland and the Isle of Wight. And we have delivered in a format of a parent workshop, which is a Brighter Beginnings workshop, which is a workshop in a specialised area, whether it's toilet training, early years entitlements, understanding your child's behaviour, anxiety and money matters. Or the practitioner workshops consist of focusing on how to work alongside parents and other practitioners to build a good relationship with families with children of SEND. We've also got our action learning sets, which Mary referred to earlier on in the session. And that just consists of how we can use co-production and parent engagement to reach underrepresented and underserved families with their perspective in mind and also with the perspective of practitioners. So if you are interested in our program this year, we are recruiting another 5 areas for this year. Please use the emails at the bottom of the slide to get in contact with either myself or Mary if you require any further information. Okay, great. So we have our Brighter Beginnings, which is our open access workshops, which consist of a few of the topics that I mentioned earlier, which is the toilet training, the early years, understanding your child's behaviour and so on. So our open access workshops are available to parents in England. And we should have the link to the Eventbrite in the chat, so please feel free to access that. We have a few in speech and language as well. They tend to fill up earlier than the others, so please grab those ones up. We also have a practitioner workshop scheduled for the 11th of June at 9:30 p.m. 9:30 a.m. sorry. So feel free to access that also through the Eventbrite link, and that also should be shared in the chat, and we'll follow up with the emails for that as well. So this video has been edited. So earlier on in the session, we asked you guys to answer the following questions. So we asked, what comes to mind when you hear the phrase underrepresented groups? And these are some of the responses that we've received from you. So we've got a few in the middle. We've got isolated, unheard. We've got ethnic minorities. We've got hidden disabilities. We've got minority communities again. We've got disengagement, single parents, marginalized. So a lot of, you know, a different mix of responses there. But hopefully this session will help us see how we can break down some of the barriers that are there, some of the challenges that are there, and see how we can kind of work together to improve and to reach these underrepresented areas and underrepresented groups.
Thank you, Ashley. We're now going to pass to our colleagues Claire and Kaylee from Genuine Partnerships. So thanks over to you, Claire and Kaylee, and thanks, Ashley. And thanks everyone for contributing to the Menti. Great suggestions.
It's recording. Hi everyone, my name's Claire Whiting. I'm an educational psychologist in Rotherham, and I'm also a co-lead for Genuine Partnerships, which is all about practitioners, young people and parents working together in equal partnership.
Morning everyone, my name is Kaylee Harrison. I'm a parent as part of the Genuine Partnerships team. I kind of concentrate a lot on the national Genuine Partnerships work. I'm also engagement lead for Rotherham Parent Carers Forum, mum of 2 young people with additional needs. It's lovely to be here today.
So a vision for today is to draw upon the 4 cornerstones model to think about co-production and what it involves. We'll also focus on how to involve children and families who might be underrepresented or underserviced. And we want to share lots of good practice examples of activities in which we and schools and setting partners have been involved. We want to emphasise why what happens in the early years and the transition to school is so crucial, and then we'll invite you to reflect on what you've learned.
So we hope by the end of today's session that you'll have a better understanding of co-production and the 4 cornerstones approach, that you'll feel more confident about working in this way, and might help you think about what you can do better and involve the underrepresented families that you may be working with. So when we try to keep a safe environment online today, we want you to be sensitive to others that are in the virtual room or in the room in what we say. We want to be respectful of others' views. Ensure that everybody has a chance to speak. I know that's a little difficult online, but we can use a chat box and have time to reflect a little later, as Claire said. Ensure everybody has a chance to speak, as I've just said, and help one another.
And so we also ask you to be mindful of these words as well. So Professor Tom Billington from the University of Sheffield wrote about how we speak with children, and then he gave us permission to extend that to thinking about how we speak with people. So be mindful in this session and after this session in thinking about how do we speak with people? How do we speak of people to others? How do we write to people? How do we listen to people? And how do we listen to ourselves when talking and working with people? And just to bear those words in mind. And so thinking about who we are and how it is that we're here today, we started this work back in 2010, 11, and it's based on some research with Rotherham children and their parents around what does it feel like to be in one of our Rotherham schools, what does it feel like to be a learner. And what we heard through that research was that for parents, with children with additional needs, it can be quite anxiety provoking. We heard lots of difficult feelings that parents experience, and for children feeling like they're inferior to their friends and that people in school don't necessarily understand them. So these were very powerful stories that we heard as practitioners. And we also heard that it's the small things that make the big difference. And those small things are all to do with relationships. So we used the research that we had, and we were invited to a Senko conference about improving parental confidence in SEN systems. And that's where we as practitioners first met parents from Rotherham Parent Carers Forum.
So at that time, Rotherham Parent Carers Forum was really in its infancy. A very small group of parents that met round a kitchen table, but knew they wanted to do something a little bit different, and was really interested in finding out what was it that us as parents did that created barriers to parents putting their children at the heart of it when working with practitioners, but also what was it that practitioners did that stopped parents working with them too, again, to keep the child at the heart of what they were doing. So we went round the borough looking for parents' views on what could make a difference, and what was the barriers. We was then invited to be keynote speakers at the same conference as Claire's just mentioned. We built a big bridge across the room that was kind of looking at, so what were their barriers and how can we meet in the middle to work together for children and young people. And that's really where hearts and minds met, and we knew that we were trying to do the same thing, and we started to work in co-production really before co-production was a thing. And so that's how kind of hearts and minds met, and we come together and worked further to evolve this piece of work.
And so as a result of beginning to work together in that way and keeping the stories in mind, we had an opportunity to be part of an innovative bid, one of Brian Lamb's innovative projects around improving parental confidence in SEN systems. And as Kaylee said, we invited people into big rooms with tables, blank sheets of paper, and tried to think about what would make the difference to families' experiences and to children's experiences in schools. What are those small things that make the difference? And the word trust kept coming up. So practitioners and parents in the room, and people from school, trust and what makes trust. And out of that work, someone suggested, wouldn't it be great if there could be a charter in our town that really represented what it is to work together in partnership as parents and as practitioners and children. And that's where our Rotherham Charter, that became known as the Four Cornerstones, was created. And so the four cornerstones are welcome and care, value and include, communicate and work in partnership. And they became our foundation for co-production. And so we began to think about, so what do those things mean? Because you can put a charter on a wall and it doesn't mean anything. And so we created a lot of materials and other things and training packages and wanted to recognise good practice. But we really drilled down to what it means and the psychology behind those cornerstones. And it really is a relational model. It's all about relationships. What it means to really welcome and care for somebody, what it means to value and include. And it's what happens between people in different situations. So if you're walking into a school building, it's what happens in that space in reception that creates that relationship. And thinking about all the experiences people have within SEND, it's about not blaming. It's about putting the child at the centre and working together as partners and developing the relationships you need to make sure that things are better for everybody. And Kaylee and I were at a conference recently and we heard Carrie Grant speak. Carrie Grant, who has 4 children with additional needs, and she's a very inspirational speaker. And she talks about how do we make people feel they belong? And really that's what that cornerstone, welcome and care, is about. And she describes it as a feeling that happens in places when people are connected. And that's what we try to do through our model, is thinking about how can we connect people. And Carrie Grant talks about that being through listening, through empathy and attunement. And they're all concepts that are really important within our model too. And so something else that we ask people to think about when we're thinking about co-production is the constructs people hold. So social constructs are all the sort of views and ideas we've got that we've gathered as we go through life, through our experience. And in our experiences, we'll have formed prejudices, we make assumptions about people, we've got prior knowledge about things. And what we ask people to do is to reflect on those and think about whether they're helpful or not helpful. So looking at the images on the slide, I'm sure that you will have an emotional reaction, and you'll be have thoughts and feelings about each of those different pictures. And they're constructs that you're taking into your thinking about those pictures. And so we ask that the same happens in thinking about co-production and working together. We ask that people reflect on the constructs that they're taking into situations, and to put them to one side if they're not helpful. Kaylee, do you want to add anything to that?
I think it's, as Claire just said, it's just being aware of those constructs and what impression that could have onto somebody else. So well, right at the beginning when I started presenting, we did this slide and people said around their concepts around tattoos. And that always stays with me, because the one lady was saying around butterflies on somebody's wrist and how she really didn't like tattoos, especially on women. And I'm sat there with my butterfly on my wrist. And although I could understand her perception and where that was coming from, it still stays with me to this day. And I've got quite a few tattoos, and I always think, oh, I wonder what people think of that. So even though being aware of it, it's also what impact that can have on somebody else when sharing them constructs. So just being aware, I'd really like to push that message moving forward.
Thanks, Kaylee.
And so when we look at this slide, we're thinking about, so what does it feel like for people in different positions? So you've probably seen this slide, it's been doing its rounds for some time now. But when we look at this slide, we see different perspectives and how sometimes it's hard to see things from other people's perspectives. So the lady can't see the rock on the gentleman's back and maybe thinking, why isn't he doing more to pull me up? Why isn't he pulling harder? And the gentleman can't see the snake biting the lady's wrist, and he may be thinking, why isn't she climbing harder? Why isn't she pulling up? And then a young person once pointed out to me as well when we're doing a presentation in a local area, actually there's a third perspective there as well. There's a snake who's feeling very frightened and somebody's in their space and lashing out where normally they would feel safe. And so I think it's just being able to communicate where you're at and why things are happening for you at that time, and who better to ask than the people that's experiencing that situation. So still thinking about communication and listening seems obvious, but it's so crucial when it comes to co-production at all levels. It's easy to get things wrong sometimes and to be distracted, but it's also so important to keep going and keep trying. When we ask children and families, what does it feel like to know when somebody's being listened to them, and also think about what your answer would be, and just pop that in the chat around, when do you feel like you're being listened to? How did that make you feel? I think for me, when I know somebody's been listening to me, is they're intrigued in what I'm saying. They're asking questions back. They're actively listening. They're communicating with me back and reassuring me of what I'm saying, so that they know that I know that person is truly listening to me. Whereas it's easy sometimes to get things wrong. We've all done it, where we pick up a phone and we're on our emails at the same time. Are we truly listening to that parent or that other person on the phone when we're also doing an email? Sometimes my children do it. They come into the room and I'm maybe doing something and I'm trying to listen to them, but I'm not fully listening. So it's just being aware of sometimes that if it's not the right time and you can't listen right then, acknowledging that and saying, I'm really sorry, I can't do that right now, but if you come back at this time, or I could give you a call at this time, I can fully listen to you. And that's always appreciated. So if you just pop into the chat. Claire. So again, when we're thinking positively, it's a really important thinking about being appreciative, thinking about building confidence and working towards equal partnerships and the welcome and care, as Claire's just mentioned again. What went well? What's working well for you? It's always hard sometimes to think positively all the time, but there's always something positive within each situation, and it's about building upon that as well. Our brains are naturally trained to look at the negatives, but we really have to retrain that thought process and thinking about, but what happened? What went well? What worked well for you in that situation? But equally, sometimes the things that we're dealing with, emotions take over. And especially when we're talking about families with children with additional needs, they're our most precious gift. We'll do anything to protect those young people, and we often experience emotional responses, and it's okay to have those responses, and they're valid and they're there. But it's about how do we hold those and how do we protect ourselves when dealing with emotional situations, and acknowledging when that's happened as well. So sometimes when I know my emotions have spilled over, I'll say, I'm really sorry. My emotions have just got the better of me. Can I give you a call back? Or acknowledging with somebody and helping them to regulate their emotions. So I can understand that this is a really difficult time and I can hear that you're emotional. Is there a better time that I could give you a call back, maybe when you've had a chance to listen to process what I've said to you? So it's just being aware of that when emotions do take over, how do we contain and support those emotions and acknowledge them together?
And I think also not to take it personally. So sometimes you might be on the receiving end of somebody's really deep and troubled emotions, things that have happened that day, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that they might be bringing into that conversation, and just understanding that. And so helping one another in sort of containing and supporting that strong emotional presence that seems to happen within the SEND world. Because you know, that there's a whole gamut of emotions that can arise for a parent when they're thinking about their most precious child, and the same for a practitioner who's wanting to do a good job, but for whatever reason there might be frustrations around that. And so that support, the empathy, validating what somebody's feeling, using what we might call emotion coaching, so naming the emotion that might be there can be helpful in those circumstances. And so we're also thinking, well, in terms of co-production, around what it means. And so there's a picture on the slide of some Russian dolls and another picture of two people with jigsaw pieces and fitting them together. So hopefully through co-production and different people coming together to work as equal partners, what one person carries is the whole of the jigsaw pieces. So building the house together is much greater than what one person brings, but the greatness, the power in that is the working together and what you construct together. But you'll have heard of Hart's ladder of participation, and almost as a hierarchy. We don't think about it in that way. We know that being given information that's clear, that's accessible, is important for all of us. We know that there are times where co-production might not be appropriate, but you do need to make sure that people have the chance to have their say and express their views, because voice is important. And so you might have an idea, ask somebody their views, and that's consultation. Participation is where you might have the idea, there's a project, and you invite people into your project to get involved, to take part. Co-production is where everyone's involved from the start. So the idea is co-created, and then each person might have a different role, hold a different piece of the jigsaw, but people are working together on it as equal partners. And so if you look at the dolls on the slide, you've got the very tiny doll, you've got the very big doll, and all the dolls in between. If you think about those in terms of power, those people working together in co-production, some people might be perceived to have more power than others. If you're doing co-production, it's everybody's responsibility to try and support other people to feel as though they've got the same power as you, and to make sure that the tiny, tiny doll has as much voice, if not more voice, than the biggest doll within that process. And again, when Kaylee and I went to the conference and we heard Carrie Grant, she put on the screen this poem, and I think we talk about safe spaces, and the space where you do co-production is really important. It needs to feel safe, but it needs to feel brave as well. So I think this poem really sort of epitomises to me the conditions you need to create for co-production. And I really like the ending of the poem. So, will not be perfect. The space will not be perfect. It'll not be always what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we'll work on it side by side. So co-production is doing things with people, not to them or for them. And as I said earlier, we continued working together. We've created materials, so we've created a self-evaluation document known as the Four Cornerstones Approach to Co-Production. There's a whole range of materials that are free and available on our website. We also work closely with Contact, and one of the things that we've produced that is available to you is a document where that will support you to measure success in terms of the cornerstones. So in terms of your co-production, and that's the Four Cornerstones Approach Success Measures document on the website. And then another resource is the quality indicators for inclusive practice and co-production. And that can be found on our website, but also on Contact's website. And that's really good if you're working with a range of agencies to think about how co-productive you are.
So when we think about voice and listening to families, we have to give extra space to families that may be underrepresented and ensuring that they feel part of that community and heard. So as Claire was saying, when we look at the power imbalances and how people may perceive, that also equates to how people feel confident and comfortable within environments. So feeling part of a community is important, but it's also really easy to feel excluded. And when we think around cultural barriers, that sometimes can be the case. And so we are really trying to work hard into building relationships with our BAME group. It's really important that they have their own space and their own identity because that's important to them, but that also that we give space to their group and also value their voice and include that within our organisation and support that as well the best way that we can to give them equity. And we do that with other groups such as Nais in Dargate within our local area, which is a group that supports people with learning disabilities and autism. And again, they like having their own group, but they want a space at the table as well, and they want to be able to come and share their group. And who better to know their community than themselves? So it's how do we build trust? And sometimes that trust can take time, and it's about going at a pace that suits everybody.
Thanks, Kaylee. And so another example of work that we've been involved in is genuine partnerships in terms of thinking about how to enable the voice of underrepresented groups is a piece of work around the Roma and Slovak communities and a forum that we've created. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So back in 2020, we were approached to support 4 schools that were thinking about how to evolve relationships with their community. It was felt that, so the word hard to reach was used. So how can we reach our hard to reach families? And the Roma and Slovak families were the ones particularly that seemed to be problematic for schools. And so we don't like to use the term hard to reach. And in fact, somebody said to me the other day, you should flip that and really think about why are we hard to reach? So are the schools hard to reach then for that community? And we, as Kaylee said just now, we felt that we weren't necessarily best placed to be the ones to be speaking to people from that community because we didn't have the language skills to do so. We couldn't speak Roma to ask. And the important thing is to know what it feels like. What does it feel like for those families to come into schools? And what is it about the schools then that might be creating a barrier? And so we worked in partnership with Clifton Learning Partnership, which is an organisation in our town that does work with those families. And we knew there were some Roma speakers within that organisation, and they agreed to support us and to work with us to ask questions that we wanted to know. What does it feel like? What does welcome of care feel like for you and your child? Do you feel valued and included? What's working well? What needs to be better? How is communication? And do you feel like an equal partner? What's going well? What needs to be better? And so we began to do that piece of work.
And as Claire's just said, who better to do that? Because if you want to know how well a pair of shoes fit, you ask the person wearing them, not the person who made them or who paid for them, who even wants to look at them. You go to the person and ask them, but not always are then people trusting of others. So it's about, who does that person trust? And working with them organisations as well when we're looking at working with our underserviced communities.
And one of the other things we looked at was the data around that community. And we quite quickly realised that the data doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of the situation, because there is an issue around self-identification for people with a Roma background. And so when it comes to census data, for example, Roma parents might not want to identify as Roma or Gypsy Roma, or categories that associate them with their own community, because of the prejudices that exist. It's a complex array of reasons. So Ferrum Primary School, which is named on this slide, it indicates there are 40% of the population at Ferrum that is white Gypsy Roma, and in fact it is more than that. And so there are slides later on in the presentation which allude to that as well. And so as we've said previously, there are a whole range of difficulties and prejudices and assumptions about this community, and we wanted to know, what do those mean for our schools and settings, and what is it that the families, parents, what are they saying about their experiences within these schools? Other figures that we know, I'm not going to go in any detail, it might be quite difficult to read, but we know that in terms of total percentage of children from that ethnicity cohort, they've got highest of all the groups in terms of SEN and with SEN support, although not with EHCs, and there might be reasons for that connected to it being a legal document. Also in terms of exclusions, and again the figures are difficult to interpret, but if you add the different groupings together, Gypsy Roma and Roma, that children and young people from that community have double the exclusions that you would expect given the percentage of that population in our town. And so what else do we know? We had a colleague in the Educational Psychology Service who did their doctorate listening to first generation Slovak Roma boys. And we looked at what his doctorate said, which is that what's important to those children is about basic human needs. It's about social equality. It's about education meaning something. So it's about culture. It is about learning in schools, but it's about practice. And we know that oppression for the Roma Slovak community within Europe has been significant. So there are reports of large numbers of Roma in Europe that were killed, for example, in the Second World War under the Nazi regime, and their stories will often be untold or unheard of. Lots of racism, lots of prejudice, and unjust treatment of Roma children in Eastern Europe and Slovakia. So these are families that then arrive in the UK. So in Slovakia, Roma are disproportionately represented in special schools, and special needs classes. There's inequality in employment, education and housing. There's separation, there's apartheid going on in schools, so with separate schools for Roma children that don't have the resources that other schools do. And that's the same in early year settings. And so coming to the UK is seen to be an opportunity for greater equality. And so we began to work together on this to think about, okay, we worked with Clifton Partnership and we gathered some feedback, did some interviews with parents. And then we came together as a team, as parents and practitioners in our team, to look at the narratives. And I'll just give a little bit of insight into those narratives. So under welcome and care, lots of positive things you'd expect from any family that were valued. And there are some quotes from parents. But in terms of needs to be better, is understanding the experience of discrimination and prejudice some of the families have experienced. And that leads to worries about their children being safe, and that can impact on attendance and sort of hesitation about sending children to school. But I think this quote, I'm a Roma person, everybody thinks Roma people are dirty with full hair of head lice and nits. And so knowing that's a perception of you, what that feels like. And then the stark reality of my son and other boys were killed, but the fault is still my son. So feeling blamed for everything, including tragedies that you've experienced in your own family. Education still being positive, education is an important thing, but understanding that, and aspirations as well as any parent would have. But understanding that writing can be difficult because Roma is a spoken language, and so it's not a written language. So writing in itself is hard. And so practical subjects are much more important and enjoyable, and understanding that. Communication is really appreciated when you can speak in your home language. And so how much it's valued that there's a Slovak lady who works at school reception, or there's an interpreter in meetings, and really understanding why that's important. The other thing is poverty. So you can't assume internet access for families. It's a significant issue. And then in terms of partnership, all the things any other family would value, any other parents would value, but particularly where Slovak Roma culture is celebrated. And offering practical support, like supporting a family to go to the ophthalmologist so that a child could get the glasses, but needs to be better, understanding what it feels like to be the only Roma parent who attends a meeting. And sometimes the culture being celebrated can feel a bit tokenistic, so it's been sensitive to that. Okay, and then what happened next is that we put on borough-wide training, and now we have quite a thriving Roma network involving schools coming together to share good practice. And I'm going to hand over to Eva, who's going to talk about one of those schools.
So hi everyone, I'm Eva from Genuine Partnerships team. I am also a Rotherham Parent Carers volunteer and a parent to SEN child. So I'm actually going to try and be Vicky from Rotherham. She's their head teacher, but isn't able to join us because they are in preparation for their Ofsted visit. I am, however, the SEN governor as part of the federation body for Rotherham, so I am fully aware of how their school works and how passionate Vicky actually is around her school and the community that she serves. So as Claire said, the percentage of Roma Slovak has now increased. Obviously, we are forever seeing a growth in the community, and obviously acceptance that Vicky is working on with her families to celebrate that they're from that culture. So I am going to have to whiz through everything. So Vicky and her amazing team put on community cafes where it's an open door for the community to come in. They've got a Roma Slovak gentleman who works there who has built up that amazing relationship with the community to build up that trust to allow for them to come in And they have the cafes that are there for them, obviously, to have a sandwich or to have a drink, just to come and sit with other people that they can relate to. We're going to go on to the next slide. I'm whizzing. We do know that some of our families obviously can't even charge their phone at home because of, various reasons. So they just provide, that random plug socket that's got an extension lead, and they'll all sit there and they'll charge their phones, and they give time to be able to ring families back home. They're able to come and have a warm, and just literally be sat together and feel like they're in their own little community, when actually we know it's very different for them, to be honest. So one of the biggest challenges that obviously we have around the language barriers, and obviously Vicky will admit she's very, very British, very Rotherham, very Yorkshire, and will speak very Yorkshire, and doesn't claim to understand their language. So she has done her best to ensure that she can communicate wherever possible with her families, if the teaching assistant isn't around, who will massively support. Google Translate is massively used by Vicky. It's not always right, because obviously we know the troubles there, but she has built that relationship with her families for them to understand that if it isn't said right, it's not what is meant, because they're aware that Google Translate doesn't also work from their language to ours. They also put on English speaking for other language classes, which is highly attended, and is going to continue to support their community, and is really, really valued. And the trouble is that we know Roma is a spoken and not a written language, so that causes its own issues. Being their SEND governor, this one is a real challenge, and obviously getting it right, because we don't want to get it wrong for the families, for the young person. Understanding the difference, is it an SEN need, is it an AEL need, working, and it takes time, and obviously it can be both. And it's the fact that they have worked together with the families and with the community to look at how do they understand which one would the child fit into. They've put together systems that they look at the areas of need and then look at how they would support that child longer term. So their curriculum as well. They want to obviously ensure that their community feels they want to learn and has aspirations. So they do include all varying communities in their learning curriculum, so that families can relate to it. So the families are willing to support the children are wanting to come to school because they can relate to it and they want to learn. So as soon as you walk through the front door, it is already there, their inclusive practice, the welcome is in. I've lost count of how many languages, but it is all there in love hearts, and everybody is really, really welcomed. Also, they have the GINA. Many of the children that join Ferrum have never even been in school. So that is, their children starting in year 6 that have never stepped foot in a school. So it is a very, very scary process for them and also for their families to let them come in. So they have GINA in place for their new arrivals, and it helps to build up the confidence, the relationships, looks at supporting the languages and the keywords and concepts of learning. I was actually in on an SEM visit quickly, and Vicky ran into the office where I was and was shouting and screaming with absolute passion and joy that there was a child that literally could not speak a word, and had within a few weeks learned 10 words and had passed on to the GINA, and was going through the steps. And the passion that Vicky has for these children and the families, she will not give up. It is just really, you can just feel it. If there's any school you could visit to see it and feel it, it's Vicky's school. Books around the school also relate to children, and it's celebrated within the school. The representation is there throughout. Also, next slide's Claire, their celebrations. They embrace all their cultures and invite the parents and the families and siblings in to come together to be part of the celebrations. They want to learn about their community as much as they want their community to feel part of the school family as well.
Thanks, Eva. Thank you.
Quick whistle stop tour. I'm really sorry I whizzed through, but we're on a time scale.
So I'm going to pass over to Larice now. Larice?
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I'm Larice. I'm currently a trainee educational psychologist at the University of Sheffield. And prior to this, I was an early years manager of a private nursery for 9 years. So the chart on the slide demonstrates the diversity of the early years setting at that time and how parents and carers had identified their child by ethnicity. So it's a really diverse area and a really diverse setting. I'm going to very briefly talk through my experience of working in partnership with families and how the 4 cornerstones apply to work we did to build on parent-carer engagement. So next slide, please, Claire. Thank you. So for us as a setting, our work started internally, recognising different cultural norms from our own, reflecting on potential biases and assumptions, and identifying what was working well and what could be causing any barriers. So we as a setting, we care for children, but what does care mean or look like for our individual families? For some of our families, it was important for their child to wash or use water after toilet trips, moisturize their skin regularly, or eat their meals how they would traditionally. We believe that welcoming a diverse representation of practitioners will promote partnership working with families, and we increase the diversity of our staff team by promoting belonging and inclusivity for them. As well as adults in the setting, we continuously worked on representation in the environment, such as ensuring that our role-play kitchens contained diverse food packaging, having musical instruments from around the world, and our books not just having familiar and relatable images, but also telling familiar and relatable stories. As a setting, it was important for us to try and learn about why engagement with families who experience marginalization might differ, because ignoring difference would have ignored the reality of our families' experiences. In regards to valuing and include, we always try to embrace difference. We aimed for an environment where practitioners, children, and their families would share their culture and comfortably be curious about others' cultures. So our food menu would include familiar foods, and our cook would even get involved, get recipes and tips from our families. We'd make sure our celebrations weren't tokenistic or isolated, but embedded throughout our setting. We would celebrate Eid and Diwali and Chinese New Year, etc., with the same intent and exposure of celebrating Christmas, whilst also acknowledging that not all occasions, such as birthdays, are celebrated in all cultures and religions. And we had a huge emphasis on belonging, aiming for everyone to feel included and for a togetherness. Parents and carers would describe us as a family, and we would do things together, like in the summer, hire coaches and go on day trips to the zoo or museum with families invited to come along. So we claimed, yes, that we worked in partnership, but we didn't claim it was perfect. So partnership working wasn't perfect. We didn't have all the answers, but we also didn't pretend to. We tried to remain curious about understanding each child's home life, what's important for each family, and what the social norms are. So small things such as being aware of how maintaining eye contact, which is often encouraged or expected, could actually be seen as disrespectful. We would encourage involvement and feedback as much as possible, and parent-carer suggestions might then inform our activities, our environment, and our action plans. We became part of the community and joined in local events, doing things like face painting at annual festivals, and aiming for an informal approach so that we were accessible, trying our best to avoid any power imbalances and genuinely aiming to work together. So for the last one, in regard to communication, for many of our families, English was spoken as an additional language, and to communicate effectively, we would often translate, but also be critical of the meaning and understanding behind those translated words. And to try and avoid power imbalances, we would address parents and carers by their name and make sure that we were pronouncing names correctly. We'd also be very cautious of the terminology we used, making sure it was jargon-free and accessible, and that all voices were respected and valued through active listening and acting on any feedback we received. And lastly, we would ensure that space and time is provided for those voices through things such as parent-carer events, but also just casually during pickups and drop-offs. And I think that it was these spaces that played a huge part in breaking down barriers and increasing levels of trust, because they became informal conversations where everyone would realize the benefits of working together.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Larice. And we're going to pass over, last but not least, to Coleridge Primary School, which is one of our Charter Gold schools. They're accredited as Charter Gold, and they're going to talk about their practice, first of all around the cornerstones, but then also about early years and transition into school. So I'm passing to Sarish first, and we've got until 10:02.
Right, we'll hopefully whiz through this then. Hi everyone, my name is Sarish and I'm the Senko here at Coleridge Primary. Yeah, like Claire said, we have been part of the Rotherham Charter and we were awarded gold last year. It was a privilege to be a part of it. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about what we do as a school and as a community, basically. So looking at the 4 cornerstones, the first one is welcome and care. So as the first point says, we have got an open door policy. People, parents, carers are welcomed in at any time of the day. You know, we get phone calls throughout the day. If there's any concerns, issues, worries, you know, we're there to answer any questions. During home times and morning as well, SLT are at the yard greeting parents, you know, obviously discussing any issues that have happened at home during the morning, or if they're struggling to get the children in, we're there, we're knocking on doors and we're supporting them to get the child out of bed, getting them dressed and getting them to school. So we've got that caring relationship with parents and that trusting relationship where we do go above and beyond, making sure that they feel safe, they feel valued. And a point that we've got on there as well was even things like blood tests. Parent have contacted us saying we're really struggling to get our child to go and get their blood done. They're very anxious about it. There's no transport. So we as SLT have taken children to get things like this done, even haircuts. So that relationship is there throughout the day, throughout the terms, throughout the year. And we've got that relationship with them for them to feel comfortable to give us a call, you know, and not be judged by anything or anyone, because we just have the same motto, shall we say. We're all human, we're all parents, we've all been there, we've all done it. And, you know, we're there to support them and their child. Value and include. So obviously making sure everyone's valued, their beliefs, their cultures, their religion, is always the first priority. So we've had issues in the past where we've got big talk, you know, talking about different genders and, you know, same-sex relationships, where parents have been feeling uncomfortable due to their religion of exposing their child to such talks. So what we do is do parents meetings where parents are welcomed in and included and shown slides of what will be discussed with their child, and that's opened up a lot of doors in a sense that they can talk to us and not just keep their child off for the day because they don't want them to be involved in such things. And again, it's just valuing their opinions. We have things like family learning as well, where parents are welcomed into joining activities in school with their child. And, you know, we just work in partnership throughout the whole sessions. We have road shows. We look at safeguarding days where outside agencies are involved. We've got Rotherham Rise, Early Help, all they come in and have workshops for parents to be included in. And obviously we've got your special inclusion teams and education psychologists as well, who are always working with parents and school at all times. communication is a key, and I think it's really important to make sure that you have that communication with parents and carers at all times, not just during the day, but throughout the day if need be. So if parents are dropping off the child who are a bit upset and don't want to come into school, we always make sure that we call parents so they are put at ease, making sure that their child is okay now and not worrying until they pick them up. So having that communication is key throughout. We do that through Twitter messages, apps and things like that. Trust is a big one for me, as a school as well in Coleridge. We make sure parents are not judged. We also make sure when we are having meetings with parents, we're open and honest about things. We make sure we are relating back to our own personal life so they feel that connection with us and they are able to open up about any concerns they have got. Okay. Oh, that was
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. And
sorry, guys.
Amy, you've literally got a couple of minutes, and I'm so sorry.
Amy.
No, it's fine. So something else that we do is just prioritise transition, if I can say that word, into EYFS and from EYFS to year one as well, because we know that that's often something that parents worry about, and also children can sometimes. And we're really lucky that our F1 work really closely with F2. They have separate classrooms, but they've got a shared outdoor area, so the children know the staff really well anyway. If they attend our F1, and most of our F2 children do come from F1, which is really good because obviously they've already established those routines and relationships as well. But we do lots of things for new to school children, for the children who are also in our F1 as well, or if they're obviously starting F1. So things like we hold open afternoons in the autumn term when parents are considering which schools to apply for, so to try and build those relationships as early as possible before they even apply so that we can get to know the children. And then we're very busy at the minute because we've just received our allocations list, and so we're working on next year as well. So straight away we communicate with parents by sending a letter, just saying like welcome to our school, etc. And then into something called Class Dojo, which we use across school for communication with parents, so that we can start that communication straight away. There are lots of things on there, but I'm just trying to summarise. We do things like home visits. We work with nurseries, so we invite staff from nurseries into school who have got children coming from there to us, so that we can find out all the information about them, and then go and visit them in their setting as well.
I'm just thinking, Amy, I'm just thinking that, so I think everybody will see this, get the slides. I don't know if there's anything you want to summarise in terms of transition from EYFS.
Not really. We're really lucky that year one have changed their practice this year, so it's a lot more similar to foundation stage, which has really helped the transition. So we all work really closely together, but again, similar, we just arrange lots of visits so the children to know the new classroom and the staff.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Richness of practice, I think, through all those examples, and something to think about in terms of the cornerstones. So I know it's your break now, and I'm sure you're keen to move around, but what we'd like you to do is, while you're on your break and stretching your legs, is just to reflect on what you've heard. I know there were lots and lots of examples there. Thinking about the cornerstones, the welcome and care, value and include, communicate and partnership, and to think about what you've learned from those examples of the cornerstones in action and supporting the involvement of underrepresented families. Is there anything that stood out to you, anything that challenged or surprised you, and anything you might change or do as a result? So while you're having your break, have a think about those things, what you might do differently, and then if you can be back at 11 or just after, and we'll ask you to populate your thoughts into the chat when you return.
Hello. So as you come back, if you can be typing in the chat, that would be fantastic. We heard so many great examples there, that it's hard to know where to start, but I really loved the ones I noticed particularly were the ones that Louise mentioned about adapting the nursery toys, the storytelling, and it reminded me, some of the Roma Gypsy examples reminded me of Roma Gypsy groups we worked with, where in nurseries, really important to be thinking about if a child doesn't have pens and books at home, what's the culture at home? So storytelling is a really cool part of Roma Gypsy culture, and really embedding that in the practice in nursery settings can be super helpful for families who are just, that transition at a young age. That can be really important, can't it? Thanks. You've got one example here. Love the community cafe, offering a safe space and being able to plug in your phone. Exactly. That was a great example. And thank you. Yeah, the ones about Chinese New Year and celebrating those cultures, but doing that in a way that's embedded and not tokenistic. So thank you for that. We do have a quick poll that I think Ashley is going to pop in the chat as well, so you can give us a quick fire response to how you're feeling about your understanding of that co-production for Cornerstones, because it's really great to hear, some specific examples and really lovely particular examples about how to adapt the four cornerstones to early years settings, and those examples. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to hand over to Rachel for you to begin that. But if anyone's got any examples, more examples you want to type in the chat, please do as we go. Thanks ever so much, Rachel.
And this is where I remember to unmute myself, so I don't get that "you're on mute" across the ether. Fantastic to see everybody here. Thanks so much for those fantastic examples, Claire, and everyone, the team. That's been amazing. So I'm going to look at early years and co-production from a slightly different perspective, but we cover the same things. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and we're all talking about bridging the gap between the families and the practitioners, and thinking about all the different complexities, particularly about those unrepresented voices, those people who often go unheard. How are we thinking about them? So let me start with explaining who I am. So I'm Rachel Wright. I'm the founder and director of Born at the Right Time. As said, I'm a qualified nurse. I've written a couple of books, got some awards and stuff for different things, and I'm the host of a rather sweary podcast called The Skies We're Under, which would be fantastic if you could check out. If you can put your cameras on, I'd love to see your faces, because otherwise I'm just talking. Basically, I'm in a shed at the bottom of my garden, and other than the chickens, which we've just discovered in the break had escaped the garden, the postman came and knocked on the door and said, "There's got some chickens outside your garden." So we've just had to chase them in, which is what I was doing, which is why I didn't get to drink my tea or eat my toast in the little break there. So the more faces, the better. That'd be fantastic. It's so good to see you all. So that's me. And Born at the Right Time is an organisation that's focused on creating a world where people who particularly have complex disabilities feel valued and supported in a community the way they belong. We heard earlier about how important that sense of belonging is. And we do that in three ways. We support parent carers directly, whether that's through the podcasts and through workshops and through blogging and connection on social media. We do that through CPD certified training for our practitioners, particularly focused on the practitioner work, on working with and collaborating, so lots of co-production and personalised care training and that sort of effective communication, difficult conversations, things like that. And then we work in trying to influence and inspire change in the people that are making the big decisions. But I'm also, those are the posh versions of me. You might have noticed, I put on makeup, straightened my hair. I even showered. It's not sniff and smell, whatever, it's scratch and sniff. But I did put perfume on for the occasion this morning. But I'm also just a person who is trying to make memories with my family, who is paying the bills, trying to make ends meet, paying the mortgage, trying to have holidays and create fun and laughter for my children. And there is that other version of me. If I'm absolutely honest, I lost my plot this morning with my children. I have cried several times today already. I feel a little bit untethered and a bit stressed. And I will come into this presentation and I will put on my professional coat and I'll do the thing and all that sort of stuff. But I bring those emotions with me. I bring with me the angst of my teenager who refused to shower again, and trying to work out how I make somebody clean themselves when the rest of us have to sit next to them. And I will have all those feelings. And somebody who is in early years and in the early stages of parenting, and particularly if they have complex needs and disabilities, they are walking around with baggages of emotion, with untapped feelings and things that they're not quite being upfront about or really true to themselves about, because it's big and it's hard and they don't necessarily like how they're feeling or what they're going through, and they come into every interaction with those feelings. And you, the practitioners who are on the call, whether you've been up with your children that night or your husband's discovered a lump or your mother-in-law may be having a dementia diagnosis, we all come into our conversations with those feelings. And it's really important that we recognize when we're thinking about collaborating and working with people together better, that we acknowledge that the whole person turns up for the conversation. And in that whole person, just stopping, as we said earlier, stopping and checking what those biases are, what the assumptions are that we've made about the people we're talking to, how that impacts the way in which we communicate. So on that note, how about on the chat to put a 2-word check-in, 2 words of how you're feeling right now. Deep breath. I will try and let go, as Elsa and Anna tell me to, of all the angst from this morning, and focus on what we're about to do. I think my 2 words are excited and stressed. I nearly did 3 words. I nearly said slightly stressed. Bit meh. Oh, I like that one. Cold. Oh, I'm sad. Cold makes me sad. Worried and optimistic. There's a fantastic word, karma-leapy, if you haven't heard it before. And it's a word that's often used for in terms of parents of children with disabilities, where you hold opposing emotions at the same time. Like the idea of being worried and optimistic at the same time, or, just feeling sort of happy and sad, and holding those emotions are absolutely true, and we get them all the time, and it's also tiring and exhausting. So we could all just be a little bit kinder to ourselves. Thank you so much for sharing where you're at. Just to make a point, I recognise that I'm talking from a language and lens that is as a white middle class woman who has a degree in nursing, and with that comes privilege. And in my training, I'm very the training that we deliver, I'm very conscious and bring in the stories of other parents and stuff. I've said feel free to raise your hand. You can, but I'll probably ignore you, so I should have taken that out. When we do go into breakout rooms, please maintain confidentiality, which I will be doing, and there will be polls and different things. And a warning to both practitioners and the parent carers on the call who have experience of parenting someone with a disability, that I will be sharing a little bit of our story. So that comes with a trigger warning that will talk about some birth trauma and that unraveling of a world that you expected. So and I'll be sharing a photo documentary of our family, which, if you take the sound off, isn't quite as emotional as if you have the music on. But just to say, misery is optional. So you're all grown-ups, you can turn off your camera, you can go off for a walk. I can't eat my toast that's sitting here getting cold, but you can. So just make yourselves comfortable and enjoy as much as you can the next little bit, that the time that we have together. So what I'm going to do is going to look at the current context of families, think about the important factors that affect co-production and collaborative working, and then think about what are the little ways that we can actually make a difference together. Karma-leapy is C-H-A-R, I'll find it for you afterwards. I can't do 3 things at once. Sorry about that, but I will find it. Okay, context. First of all, as we've heard in so many of the stories and the scenarios that were shared earlier, there are lots of potential sources of difficulty. People have different hurdles, they have different challenges. But it's really important to remember that generally people get up every morning and they want to do a good job and they want to do the right thing. Whether you're a parent, a practitioner, you might be in situations that are challenging, that you might feel at the end of your rope. You might be in a context that you feel you're not sufficiently supported by your management and services. But we need to all remember that generally people are getting up and doing the very best that they can. So the current context is that demand is going up. We've had this bottleneck of COVID. There's been changes in services. The fact that we're all doing this hybrid working, the fact that we're all online, and we're not dialing up Skype as we used to not that long ago, means that shows that evolution and those changes. There's waiting lists and there's anxiety associated to that waiting list, and the anxiety from practitioners of going into conversations with people have been waiting for a year to get that early years speech and language or that therapy appointment, and the intensity of that changes the tone for that collaborative working, and practitioners are tired, and so are families. And with families, and again, that the sort of the holdover from COVID, but also just the reality of feeling separate and different to people in your community, there is that sense of isolation and fatigue. There's a fear of what's coming next. There's the kind of Rishi Sunak's speech 3 or 4 days ago around disability and benefits. It creates a culture and a conversation around our expectation of disability and people who are disabled, and it affects us, it affects our families, and there's this potential erosion of trust. So here's my story. This is my my boyfriend as it was. I'll show you when the bits there you go. I will be clear about the recording. You can show photos of Tim and I. So Tim and I got together when we were teenagers, and I had a dream. We were total cliche. He's a doctor, I'm a nurse, so we were going to go off and save the world one person at a time. If you've heard me talk about this before, there is nothing new. This is still the same story. So we did do a bit of work in Uganda and Rwanda and New Zealand and various places like that, because I have a bit of an idea. Everybody has an idea of themselves, don't they? My idea of myself, that is, it's like I'm part Lara Croft and part Florence Nightingale. I've got the care and compassion of Flo, and I've got the kick-ass of Lara. I might have my lamp one minute and my steel-toe boots the next. But let's be honest, I'm neither of those things. But we did go abroad and we did do traveling, and then we came back and we did all the grown-up things like buying a house and having proper jobs, and Tim started his GP training and I started practice nursing, and we became pregnant as well. And you can read lots more about my story of transitioning into parenthood on my book, The Skies I'm Under. But suffice to say, it didn't go to plan. I had expected this dream of coming home, having a couple of kids, and then going off to another country and working, and that didn't happen, because when my son was born, he was born unexpectedly at term. There was no prematurity, but I couldn't feel him move. And I went into hospital to have it monitored and checked, and he was born by an emergency cesarean, not too frantic, but it was born by an emergency cesarean, and he didn't move, he didn't breathe on arrival, and had lots and lots of support and lots of care. And other than the fact he looked like a complete hypochondriac filling the incubator when all these other babies were little tiny prem babies in Skaboon, we went off into a different world that I neither had expected nor planned. And we were given these stats of whether he would survive or not. And we had a couple of days where we weren't sure whether he was going to be there. We were ever going to bring him home. This was 3 days when we got our first cuddle in Skaboo. And I remember at the time thinking that I understood the potential for grief and losing my child more than I understood the change and the transformation in our lives and our hopes in order to to be a parent of somebody with a disability. That feels really uncomfortable to say now, but that's the reality of how I felt. And that transition and that change from that mother I was then to the person I am now was formed really powerfully in deep emotions in those early years. When you're talking to parents, they're going through a change in themselves that is huge. It kind of really taps to their core. So at 12 days old, we brought our baby home, which was a pretty short stay in Skaboo. I'd like to say I have a better photo to mark this momentous occasion, but unfortunately my husband's face is ruining this one, as he clearly can't even show the appreciation of this beautiful moment that we are sharing together. I think actually the angst he's feeling is the only thing I'm carrying is the camera. But I've just had major abdominal surgery. I've just had a cesarean section, and therefore I think it's perfectly reasonable. Looking at the photo now, possibly could have carried a balloon. But sometimes you don't see these things until after the event. So we went away with all this stuff in our hands, including an MRI scan appointment at 10 weeks. And this is not his scan, so don't try interpreting it if you're a closet neuroscientist or radiographer. But it was all the things that we didn't want to be said in that appointment. It was he had white matter damage in his brain, grey matter damage in his brain. He was, we weren't told any nevers. He's never going to walk. He's never going to talk. He's never going to any of those things. But it was made really clear that these milestones that I had unwittingly imagined were no longer guaranteed. They were no longer part of our world. I talk about it in the book as though the consultant had conjured up a paintbrush of dripping white emulsion, and where my wall of hopes and dreams and future and all the things we were going to do and what life was going to be like was just whitewashed. And a whitewashed wall can be a place of expectation and of opportunity, but in those first days it just felt like a whitewashed wall of isolation and unknowns. And there's lots of things that I will remember. There's things like the first time, because very often parents like me don't have just one consultation. We fall down this rabbit warren of disability, and you get more and more diagnoses. And I remember the first time someone used the word disabled or palliative care. Excuse the chickens. Can you hear the chickens? They're going mad outside my, I don't know why. But I remember the words and the equipment. Honestly, everybody else is in early years, they're all picking out rainbows and giraffes and, do you want Winnie the Pooh or do you want some other character? And I'm looking at 4-point harnesses, and I'm looking at foot plates, and I'm looking at headrests, and I'm looking at whether it's pecs or trying to adapt things, and it just felt so far from what everybody else was feeling, and it created in me a hypervigilance of trying to read between the lines and really understand what was happening. It also affected my sense of needing to fight and get the things that was going. And I remember how people made me feel at each of the ways. Right, I'm going to do a poll, and I have a feeling the cohort of parents will get this much faster, or maybe than anyone else. Tell me, how many people do you think I have to communicate with about my son? And I don't just mean the professionals, that includes the professionals, but it also includes like the person that's doing the pad delivery or the telephone appointment about the syringes or anything else. I'm not going to give you too long, so if you're watching Netflix and you miss the poll, that's tough. We've got about 70% rate at the minute. Okay, I'm going to share that in a second. So here we go. We've got the most saying between 30 and 50. When I sat down a couple of years ago now, and I looked at the different people that I have to communicate with, and these are all the people that I could think of. So that's over 80. Over 80. And that doesn't just happen, but that kind of accrues over these early years. Over these first 3 or 4 years, it's like gather, I don't know, you become some weird collector of professionals that you didn't actually want to be a collector of professionals, but you start off and you've got a GP and you've got a health visitor, and then it's a specialist health visitor, and then you start accruing portage workers and dietitians and physios and OTs and speech and language therapists. And then you have maybe your child ends up needing support through feeding, and you get more hospital appointments, and you get different consultants, and you get consultants in ENT, or you get consultants in gastro, you get a consultant in neurodisability, or you get a consultant in autism and ADHD. But you accrue, you get psychologists, you accrue all these people. And for me, that feels like overwhelming. You add in some of these unrepresented people who are in a different culture, whose language is English is not their first language, then this maze becomes so much more impenetrable. It becomes so much more complicated for us parents who don't understand the system very quickly and easily, or to manage the system takes extra effort and extra care. And it feels like, as parents, that we go from private citizen to public property, because these professionals don't just come in and we have to make them cups of tea, but they come in and they tell us how to do everything. From how we feed our child, to how we put them to bed, to how we play with them, to how we sit them, to how we read them a story or stimulate their vision. And all the things that I thought I'd be able to determine and choose as a parent suddenly had somebody else's opinion. And there were good opinions. There were things I wanted to hear and things that were going to make my child's life better, but there was still somebody else's opinion about something that I wanted to control and expected to control. So just to reiterate the impact of those extra layers, we talked about that intersectionality earlier. It's talking about, is this person's language, is English their second language? Do they have cultural norms that aren't represented? Are all the pecs of white people that we're showing and don't have the ethnic context? Are we, when we send out the blurb of SEN, is that the quality and the diversity of people represented? Our own stereotypes and assumptions challenged, because we know that there is systemic and cultural privilege and bias by the fact that you've got the leader results, the results of preventable deaths in people with learning disabilities, and how horrific it is for people who are part of the Black and minority ethnic groups. So much more likely to have complications through life. We've got a really power imbalance. Again, that was talked earlier in the presentation from Genuine Partnerships. And we've got it's a bit fancy words, normative ableist narrative. Basically, we're all ableist. We all think that our value is tied up in our productivity and what we do and the things we can do. And so even like our EHCPs and our IEPs and the targets we give people is about independence and doing something on your own. And in itself, that is a fundamentally quite ableist. Anyway, my family, this was 9 years ago now, and my youngest son's just turned 9. And whenever I think about the emotions and the complexity of Sam, I then went into early years with my, I was nearly about to say my typical remaining children, except both of them have neurodivergence. And how much of that is trauma-based and how much of that is their neurodivergence, who knows. But I go into mainstream contexts, but I still carry the emotions and the trauma and the triggers of my parenting as Sam's mum as well. And it's important to recognize that we only get to see the tip of the iceberg of people. So I obviously posted the photo on the left on Facebook, and clearly there's about 40 versions of the one on the right that were edited out, because we only get to see a part of people's life. So many parents that you will come into contact with have dramatically different stories, but there will always be more than meets the eye. In that moment in the day of the argument before they started, to the big things of the stress and anxieties of big decisions, and our importance as parents and as practitioners is to connect with people where they are at. So this is where I'm going to share this little photo documentary, and then we're going to put you into breakout rooms. This is where we pause into this breakout room. Welcome back, and apologies for those people who found themselves rather than a breakout room in isolation. That was not our intention, and is not really in the heart and spirit of collaborative working. I'm going to whiz through this last little bit, and we need to be finishing now. And I've overspoken as ever. But our key point here is to think about the good relationships. Do pop in the chat things you have discussed, because it's always great to share those things. That good relationships, consistent and reliable messaging, and trauma-informed practice all work towards more effective working and collaborative. So the little things that make a difference. Using people's names. We talk about that connection. We talk about that belonging. There's 50% of parents, depending on the research, between 50 and 90% say they'd rather be used by their first name than mum or dad. Simply starting the conversation as, hello, my name is Rachel. And you are? What would you like me to call you? And doing that when you see that person. Bob goes to the same butcher's every week on a Friday because he knows they're going to walk in and they're going to say, hello, Bob, and it makes him feel seen. How much more when you're in the sea of obscurity of SEN provision and complex needs does it make when someone uses your name or calls you mum because that's what you've asked them to do. Listening to understand, not simply listening to respond. Listening in order to really get to grips with where the person's coming from and find out what's important to them, not just so that you can say your thing slightly better in a cleverer way. And asking really powerful questions such as what matters to you, trying to correct that power and shift the focus into the stuff that I can do and the busyness that I have and the service we provide, but what's the matter with you here and now, and how can I step into your world? I've got this thing about multidisciplinary teams that they're more like toddlers in a sandpit than Dungeons and Dragons players, and we need to be more D&D and less toddler. So often we work as multidisciplinary team by just simply sitting next to each other around a big fat table. And we're not actually sharing our goals, and we're not actually doing the things, because Jimmy and Jenny might have their bucket and spade and they might have their truck, and they go and tell their parents that they played with each other at the sandpit, but they didn't. They played with their toy. They did their thing. They just did it in close proximity to someone else. So how often do we just do things in close proximity with other people, and we don't actually share our goals and share our resources and share our expectations? So we can work, and that's even more important with those unrepresented people, because it includes their culture, it includes the language, it includes so many other components. So how are we working more like D&D players? The reason trust is so encompassed in the core cornerstones is because it's so important. And that trust of, there's a fantastic definition by Charles Felton that says, trust is believing that what's important with me is safe with you. How are you cultivating in the lives of people who feel bereft and feel lost and feel excited and joyful and proud that their loved ones, their children, their babies can be trusted with you? So in the chat, pop 2 things you're going to take away from today's session. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to quickly summarize what we've covered in our whistle stop presentation this morning. So pop into the chat 2 things you're going to take away. Just to summarize, family voices and many stories. We started off, which feels hours ago now, doesn't it? We started off with those families at the very, very beginning of the session, thinking about their different stories and their different perspectives. And then we were kindly taken through the 4 cornerstones of co-production, the need to listening, that equalising of power and partnership working, the importance of an opportunity to work with unrepresented communities. And we had the fantastic example of Farnham School and what that looked like, as well as Coleridge. And then we looked at those things were able to express some of the values and behaviours related to those 4 cornerstones. So what they look like with skin and bones on, and the different ways we can show inclusion. I shared a bit of my story and a bit of the emotional and psychological impact of those early years and how that can affect collaborative working. And then I very quickly touched on just a couple of things that are little things that can make a big difference. And we're going to leave it there, and we can look at the chat and see if there's any
Thank you so much, Rachel. This has been fantastic and just beautiful to hear your story, and to understand, get into what those questions, how to ask those questions that open up the conversation in a difficult way, where there's been difficulty, where there's not trust, and such great examples of where people are building trust, and particularly with families who perhaps need more time, empathy, and those language points that people are sharing about. Rachel, is there anything you want to add there, just to follow from what people are saying?
No.
That's great. Well, no, it's really, really great to hear everybody's thoughts, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to have a bit more of a interaction in the open session, but that's because we're so fantastically well attended by people from all over the country. So thank you all for coming. Now we've got just a few minutes, we want to share a couple of things for you from Contact, because we've got a couple of events coming up, so we'll pop those in the chat, and those are we have already shared our link for parents, and we've got parent workshops coming up, and we will put all of this into an email that will follow up, but just to say that we do have some more practitioner training coming up. So we've got one session on sensory, working with families around supporting children with sensory difference. That's coming up next week. And we've also got a practitioner workshop working together with families to support families of early years children, and working co-production. So we've got one practitioner workshop coming up in June. That's coming up. So we did want to just have a minute or two if there are any burning questions. If I know that Claire is still here, I think Eva might still be here, and I think we've got a couple more, several of our speakers are still here. Did you have any burning questions that you really would love to ask the speakers today? And if so, if you could type them in the chat, helpful. I may not be able to see everybody's hands if you put your hand up, so you'll have to bear with us.
It's a rich tea, if anybody wants to know.
If that's your question.
Biscuit. If that's your question, what biscuit are you eating? It's a rich tea.
We were saying that the background noise of the chickens has added to the ambience this morning. Thank you, Rachel. And
it's a pleasure.
It's been so fantastic to hear about all the different examples, I think, and really varied examples of working together with families, and the kinds of collaboration that can happen, that can make things so much better, not just a little bit better, but sometimes quite small things that can make a huge difference for families. The way that a question is asked, or taking the time to bring families together in the way that we've seen as well. Thanks ever so much, everybody. The music to the film is a question, because it really did. I think it made quite a lot of us cry, Rachel. We'll blame you for that this morning, but that's
not the intention.
No,
the intention
but in
is
a good
not
way. We were with you, and it was an amazing story.
I think it's important to remember. I think that emotional feeling it's really important as professionals that you we work out how to connect with each other. And I do lots of stuff around this in my training. We work out how to connect with each other in our humanity without taking other people's trauma. So it's about connecting with our stories and seeing the connections of that without being sort of prevented from working effectively and being our best selves because we are being traumatized, because we care about the job that we do and we care about the families that we work with. So how do we find that that commonality of who we are with each other moving forward?
Thank you so much. I can see people nodding. I think you've really connected with people in this group. So thanks ever so much for everyone for coming. We do have a quick survey monkey. We would love you to reply. I think it's just a few questions, 3 questions, maybe 4, just to get your feedback about what you found useful from today's session. So we will be posting that in the chat in just a moment. And we will also be sharing that after the event so that you can give us your feedback, let us know what was useful, and what you'll be taking back. So if there's anything that you will be taking back to your settings, to your conversations with families, or if you are a family, if there's anything that you will be taking back to share with other families, please do let us know in that survey monkey, because it's really helpful for us to understand what you found useful and what you'll be taking away, and maybe even what you'll be changing where you are. So thank you very, very much for that. And so I'm just going to say thanks again to our speakers. Thank you to Kaylee, and I know Kaylee had to leave early. Thank you to Kaylee and to Claire for sharing Genuine Partnerships Rotherham story and your amazing work up in Rotherham. And thank you to all your speakers. I'm going to have to check my note because there were so many. Thank you to Amy, and Larice and Sarish and Eva. You were just fantastic. Some brilliant examples to take away there. Thank you so much to Rachel for sharing your examples and for challenging us really to think differently and to bring our best selves and our positive energy to all of the conversations that we have to support families in the early years. And thank you to the parents who've contributed today and your examples of your families. And I know that hopefully we've connected and heard from many of you today. So we're going to leave it there. We will follow up with all the information that we shared today in this, with the slides certainly, and the links in our emails to you all. Thank you ever so much for your time this morning. Go away, eat some, not just biscuits, eat some lunch, and have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you ever so much for joining. Thanks. If there's anyone still in the call, I'm going to say goodbye, and unless there's anything pressing that you are needing to ask us, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you ever so much. Thanks, Claire and Rachel and Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.